Tens of millions of guys have lost their children, their homes, their money, their entire retirements, and their social circles to a woman who took it all away just because she decided that she didn't want to be with him anymore. And today I want to look more deeply into that. And to do it, I'll use the work of psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg to contextualize why it happens. Some of you may remember from Psych 101 that Kohlberg was not simply interested in what people do. He was interested in the reasoning they use to convince themselves that what they're doing is fair and acceptable. And the result was his 3-level, 6-stage theory of moral development. Again, some of you may be already familiar with it, and I hope this helps. So coming up, I'm going to give you the background on how and why he developed his theory and explain how the 6 stages of moral development applies when a woman leaves and decides how much of your life she'll be happy to take with her. Now, real quick, as I mentioned a couple of days ago, I'll be streaming with Dan from Men Need to Be Heard this Wednesday, the 24th. Here's the details on the screen. I know that a lot of you watch his content as well as mine, so please do join us there. I'm also finishing the 3rd video in the early laws that created the child enforcement that started all of it. That should be out tomorrow. And I'm working also on a deeper current dive, maybe I'll make that this weekend's deep dive, into the temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, and how your child support is used to pay for welfare costs. Not sure when that's going to be ready, but it is forthcoming. All right, so now let's do this let's throw in this video montage that I haven't used in quite a while. Here we go.
It's time to all choose your timeline on the roller coaster of life.
All right, so prior to Kohlberg, Jean Piaget had already argued that children's moral thinking changes as they mature. And that included younger kids perceiving rules as fixed commands from authority. So they respond mainly to consequences, while older children, they become more able to consider intentions, reciprocity, and sometimes even negotiation if it's done fairly. Kohlberg took that basic developmental stage type idea and then asked, does moral reasoning keep developing beyond childhood? He developed the framework while doing his doctoral studies at the University of Chicago in the 1950s. In 1958, he did his dissertation titled The Development of Models of Moral Thinking and Choice in the Years 10 to 16. His original research, that dissertation involved 72 white, lower to middle class boys in Chicago, again, ages 10 to 16. So what he did was he gave them a moral dilemma and then interviewed them about why they thought a certain action was right or wrong. The famous example that some of you may be familiar with became the Heinz dilemma. So that's the one in which a man cannot afford a drug that may save his wife. So should he steal it? And these kids were asked to answer those types of questions. Now again, the key aspect is that Kohlberg was not mainly interested in whether somebody said, in this instance, that Heinz, the husband, should steal the drug for his wife. Kohlberg was more interested in the reasoning behind the answer. Right? So two people might both say that, yes, Heinz should steal the drug, but for very completely different reasons. They might say, for example, that he'll feel bad if his wife dies, or that people will think he is a bad person, a bad husband, if he doesn't steal it. So to Kohlberg, those types of responses reveal very different forms of moral reasoning. And by the way, when I do these types of theory-driven dives, my intention is to help you learn and understand them better so you can apply them to real-life issues. I'm using it here to explain why, of course, women rake men in when a relationship ends, but as you can imagine, this type of thing shows up in many areas of life. So that's why I go so deep into these discussions. It's not to waste my time or yours. It's to help educate so guys can better inform themselves and hopefully prosper a little bit more for it. All right, so anyway, to better understand context behind Kohlberg's work, it's important to contextualize Kohlberg himself. His theory came out of the post-war 1950s and 1960s, when American psychology, education, and law were all wrestling with questions about authority, rights, obedience, even civil disobedience, and things like segregation, and what makes a law legitimate rather than just merely enforceable. And as we'll see as it relates to women taking everything from you, that's why later stages in his model move from simple law and social order towards social contracts, individual rights, and laws that themselves can be evaluated. Stepping back just a little bit more, born in 1927, in the aftermath of World War I, and growing up during the Depression and World War II, Kohlberg matured during a period when questions of authoritarianism, obedience, and human rights were nearly impossible to ignore, even at the global level. In fact, before graduate school, he spent time helping transport Jewish refugees to Palestine after World War II. And that experience is often mentioned in a lot of his biographical accounts, because it's in line with the moral and political gravity that later shows up in his work. And that is the question of whether rules, governments, and institutions deserve obedience simply because they hold power. All right, so what the hell does all of this mean, and how does it apply to the topic at hand? Women taking seemingly everything from men and fathers after a relationship ends and feeling just fine when they do it. So to answer that, we'll walk through Kohlberg's 6-stage theory using that specific example, and keep in mind that according to Kohlberg, what's important is the reasoning behind the behaviors, not the behaviors and decisions themselves. The overarching consideration is what logic is driving women's decisions and behaviors. And then, as we'll see, whether they ever confront the consequences of others as a result of their actions and behaviors. So let's start with stage 1. These first 2 stages are what he referred to as pre-conventional. In stage 1, we see punishment and obedience at the childhood age. The logic here is, I don't want to be punished. So in the postmodern version with these women, she might say, or even just think things along the lines of, I need to get ahead of him before he can hurt me, leave me with nothing, or make me look bad to other people. Now here, the motive is things like fear and self-protection, not fairness. She may be reacting to anticipated loss, maybe even shame, vulnerability, or hell, as many of us are well too familiar, retaliation. So the issue is not whether any of that fear is real, it's whether fear becomes a blanket permission slip to preemptively take everything that you own. So sticking with the pre-conventional parts is stage 2, and this is where we see the self-interest type of exchanges. So the core logic here is asking questions like, what can I get out of this? So with these women, it might sound something along the lines of, if I can get primary custody, the house, child support, his retirement, and the car, then I should. He would do the same thing to me. And this is the blunt extraction stage. The settlement is treated as a competition, and the relevant question becomes what can be secured, not what is actually needed for continuing or moving on. And this is where your relationship with a child, your future stability, your dignity, and your ability to move on and rebuild becomes secondary to her winning everything. Moving on to the next stage, number 3, this is where we move into what he referred to the conventional. And this is where we start to see some approval and wanting to be the good person type of morality, with a core logic of asking questions along the lines of, what will make other people see me as a good person, or just good in general? So comments that you'll often hear are something like, my friends, my therapist, my family, my social media groups, they'll all support me if I say that I'm protecting the child and I'm starting over all by my lonesome. And this is where image management becomes very central. She may need to be seen as the wounded yet responsible and empowered person. A claim can be emotionally sincere and still be shaped by the rewards of public approval. We have this conversation a lot. Those things for women would include validation, praise, sympathy, and even insulation from criticism. Staying in the conventional part is stage 4. That one's next. This is where we start to see the law and social order type of morality. And this is where things are going to start to get a little more cut and dry. With this one here, number 4, the core logic is that the system says I'm entitled to it. So you'll hear statements like, my lawyer says that this is the standard. My lawyer says that I deserve this. The court allows it. Laws give me the right to do it. These laws were created for people just like me in this exact instance. So this is a stage where legality becomes a substitute for conscience. She may see herself as not taking anything unfairly. She may actually believe that. And that's because professionals, court procedures, and standard practices have already approved her request. But a legal entitlement can still produce a moral harm, as we all know. The system can turn self-interest into procedures and remove the need for any of her self-examination. Right, these last two stages are where things really change. This is what Kohlberg referred to as post-conventional. Stage number 5 deals with social contracts and understanding other people's rights. The core logic here might sound something along the lines of arrangements that can protect everyone's rights for the larger good. In the post-relationship version, again, this is where things are going to get a little bit different. What we would like to hear is, the law may permit me to take everything, but the child needs both parents. And we both contributed to this life and committed to bringing up this child. So what agreements are sustainable and fair over time for everybody? This is where thinking begins to move beyond maximum legal entitlement. It recognizes that formal rules are meant to serve human beings, not replace moral judgments, and to serve as one person's take everything you can card. A person at this level asks how to protect a child's relationship with both parents, how to preserve reasonable security for both adults, both parents, and how to create an arrangement that neither side must experience as a permanent moral injury or trauma of sorts. And by the way, let me just say right here, Kohlberg did contend that not a lot of people reach stage 5, and very, very few reach stage 6. The last, and this one again rounds out the post-conventional. Stage number 6 deals with universal ethical principles. So the core logical type question here might sound something like, what is right, even if it costs me, even if it's a detriment to myself? What we would like to hear in divorce situations, what we would like women to say is something like, I will not use the child as leverage. I'll not take any more than I reasonably need. I will not exploit a legal system and its advantage simply because I can. His relationship with the child and his dignity are still important, and I'm going to try to maintain that. Now, as I mentioned, this is Kohlberg's highest proposed form of moral reasoning. It's not about being passive or refusing legitimate protection. This one is about voluntarily refusing to weaponize access to children, legal loopholes and leverage, even public narratives. The question here is not what can force another person to surrender. What this one is intended or not intended to do, but what it describes is what harm you refuse to do when you have the power to do it. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, even if it negatively affects you. So after avoiding punishment in stage 1, stage 2 says, what can I get? Stage 3 says, will people praise me for getting it? Stage 4 says, I'm legally allowed and entitled to this. Stage 5 asks, what arrangement protects everyone's legitimate interests? Notice that big change there. And then finally in stage 6, logic would ask, what am I willing to give up because another human being should not be destroyed for my benefit? Now, perhaps the biggest contrast is probably between stages 4 and 5, as I mentioned. A great deal of post-relationship behavior looked morally respectable because prior to stage 5, it's socially and legally approved. Again, the court is giving this to me. My attorney told me to ask for it. This is what women are supposed to do. I have to secure my future. I didn't make the rules. But as we all know, following a system's rules is not the same as engaging in full, mature reasoning. Stage 4 says the rules authorize it. Stage 5 is where things change by asking whether that rule actually serves for the greatest good of everyone involved. And stage 6 asks whether the person should still do it even after fully confronting the human cost, everyone else's considerations. And this is what makes the framework so vivid in this example. Divorce systems in society can allow women to remain morally underdeveloped because the system turns self-interest into praise and acceptance. And by the way, before I forget about this, let me just back up here real quick to stages 5 and 6. Men, I believe, are socially forced into those higher levels. And we can verify that by statements like women and children first. Who was the first ones off the Titanic? Men are the ones that are expected to work the dangerous jobs, to kill the spiders, right? So regardless of our benefit, this is where society places us, whether we like it or not. Okay, back to this. Once lawyers, courts, therapists, and everybody else approve the process, right, that social validation, if you would, then she can take everything from you while not thinking twice. Hell, she'll even feel great about doing it. Now listen, I would love it if we could get some of these examples into curriculum and textbooks when models like Kohlberg's are taught in classrooms, but that will never happen. It'd be great if it could be used in training materials outside of classrooms in professional settings. If they would talk about these issues in contexts that are helpful for men in their experiences. Instead, they almost always include hypothetical examples like the Heinz dilemma that I mentioned earlier, something similar. So I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts. How well does this line up with your experiences, or hell, maybe somebody that you know, or just what you hear about in society? And please don't forget that I would love to have you as a channel member for just a few dollars a month. Like the other ones who support this channel, you'll get behind the scenes videos that are much more personal, much more laid back and relaxed, and all of my videos before everyone else. If you'd like to get everything totally ad-free and pushed immediately to your phone or your inbox, you can do that over on Patreon like a couple of others have already done. There's a link below for that. Dude, listen, I am working my ass off to do this full time. I'm pumping out now 6 and 7 videos a week. I absolutely love it. I love the teaching aspect of this. And that type of support on channel members and Patreon really makes it a lot easier to get my work out and my messages to other guys who really need it. So I do hope that you enjoyed this bit of a lesson. I know it was a little bit more of a lecture. Be careful out there, as I like to say. I'll be back soon.